All right, so we'll call this Finance Committee meeting to order. We have just a couple items. We're going to begin with an FY21 year-to-date expenditure projection. Kathy's going to have a presentation for us on that, and then that will sort of set the framework for being able to discuss potential additional funding, which, you know, is slated to be taken up by the legislature when they reconvene on the 30th. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Javier and Kathy.
Yeah. So thank you, Anna, and that is the framework for the agenda. I guess first, happy Father's Day, Roberto and Henry, and I don't know, Greg, if you are a dad, so I apologize, but
I'm not.
Good to see everyone. And what we are going to start with, as Anna said, is just a recap of our sort of our projection of where we think we will be at the end of this year, and then combine that with our existing fund balance to give you a picture of the fund balance, which I know we discussed in this committee prior to going into the budget year, but it's obviously getting larger. And so I think that I wanted us to try to, Kathy and I wanted us to sort of look at that in the context of what we're trying to do with additional funding should that actually materialize. And then the second half of the meeting will be focused on what we could potentially do with EPS funding. So we'll talk about it then. So Kathy, do you want to go ahead and just jump in with the year-to-date expenditures?
Certainly. So I'm just going to preface this with the understanding that this is my first few months in the position, and I haven't really had the benefit of sitting with all the department heads or our external auditors to really review our financial statements and typical year-end adjustments. But with that said, I'll go through the slide presentation, which admittedly is a little difficult to read because it's tiny, but I'll do my best to explain that as we go along. So we start the year in this column here with our FY21 beginning fund balance, and then to that will be added our projected surplus or deficit. And as a reminder, our local budget consists of 4 different funds, which we don't always talk about separately, but they are reported separately. So the general fund, which is by far the largest and typically our main area of concentration, is where most of our expenditures reside. And then we have a couple of adult ed funds and a food service fund. So we actually do projections for those separately and discuss their fund balance separately. But the majority of that money resides in the general fund here. So starting with the general fund, we're anticipating a surplus of somewhere around $2 million. And this is primarily due to the pandemic, which, while it caused reductions in some areas, especially where social interaction was involved, it increased costs in other areas, such as custodial supplies and a host of other related costs related to remote learning, especially. Fortunately, we received the federal funding to help offset these costs, and these pandemic-related expenditures were shifted from local funding to federal funding, which is really why we have so much left over, or are predicting that we'll have so much left over at the end of the year in our local budget. Adult Ed was able to continue operating remotely, and they appear to have held their own. We're expecting that they will have a $173,000 surplus. And food service, of course, I think we have realized that they're anticipating a loss, which would be around $400,000. So the negative in this case is really a surplus, and the positive number would be a loss. So these surpluses move to fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. And so I'm kind of moving from right to left here to show that this is where we start with 4.2 million. We would add another 2.3 million if that projection is accurate. We actually calculated that we have an excess surplus our excess fund balance above 3% of the prior year's operating budget. We're not typically allowed to keep that in an unassigned fund balance, and that's something that we would probably move to a committed or reserved fund balance here, just to safeguard that money. It's definitely in our best interest to move it to a reserve rather than maintaining it. The state has communicated that it has never reduced EPS share by excess amount in recent history, but it could do so at any time. So that's just showing the movement of budgeting categories here. I mean, fund balance categories here. And then this last one, we're required to reserve or restrict our fund balance for CTE. And that actually, we have $140,000 that we had as a surplus in FY20. We also seem to have had a $156,000 surplus for FY19 that we also need to include in the reserve. So the sum of those two, we would be increasing by another 156 to just shift that out of the unassigned over to the restricted here. And I would note that the use of any fund balance does need to be budgeted as a revenue source with the corresponding expenditure in order for it to be used. Just because it's sitting there doesn't typically mean that we can just spend that, and that applies to the CTE money as well. So one final note, I think, on this is that we have currently a committed fund balance for capital improvement reserve of $3 million. And I'm still discussing that with the city because it's their understanding that that money's been spent. So I don't think we really have that kind of money sitting there. But we're going to talk about how we account for that. And as soon as I know more information, I will share it. But right now we have $3 million sitting there on the books. But that was established in 2016. And it said that we would have a 3-year plan for spending that. And they do believe that we did and that we have spent that. And then, let's see, just a couple of little...
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
What does the city, what do they believe we spent the money on? And
capital improvements for FY17 or 18. So they believe we spent it for the purpose it was set up for, but it doesn't look like we adjusted the books.
Okay, so we can track that down and verify.
Absolutely, I'm in the process of doing that with them so that we can adjust that and make that an accurate number. But right now it looks like we have that money available to us, and I don't believe we do. So we're going under the assumption that we do not. And then these are just a few little adjustments this year. For FY22, we usually adjust our assigned fund balance as the amount that we said it was our budgeted use of surplus for adult ed. We were going to use $20,000 for adult ed. We said we were going to use $500,000 of our surplus for the general fund, and we were going to use $250,000 for a food service. And so these adjustments are just transferring money from our unassigned balance to our assigned balance so that those are reflective of what we've designated as budgeted use of surplus for FY22. So that's what our fund balances should look like at the end of the year. Are there any questions on fund balance? It's just the accumulation of our surpluses year over year.
I don't see any hands raised.
Can I just make sure that the board has the full context on this? By law, we're allowed to carry 3.5% over previous year's balance in a unassigned fund balance, but anything that is above that, should either, be moved into a reserved balance, or, it runs the risk, as Kathy mentioned, of being sort of subtracted from our EPS funding in subsequent years. Again, the state has not done that in the past, but I think the main point of this for us today was to sort of make sure that you understand that we are above that 3.5%, expect to be above that 3.5%. We're above that 3.5% I'm sorry, I keep saying 3.5% and it's 3%.
Yes.
We're above that, and we're above that this year. That's the 396 that you see there. So I think it's important, particularly as we move into this next conversation, to understand that in addition to the potential for that funding coming in from EPS, that there is the possibility of looking at adding funds to a reserve that could potentially come from the unassigned fund balance, which I think would be prudent for us to be having this conversation broadly of both of those sources of revenue coming in. And I think that's why we prioritized getting this to you. Obviously, this was also important, as part of just keeping the board updated on where we are with our year to date. We've been I don't think that this should be a surprise. I think that, we wound up in a similar place at the end of last year, just with all of the things that we didn't do at the end of the year because of the pandemic. And this year, with the influx of federal funding and so on, we expected that we would wind up in a place that would look like this. So I think that, that's also important for the Finance Committee to understand that as part of your ongoing monitoring of our budget.
Emily, did you have a question?
I do. Bear with me for a second, and I know we've gone over this, and so sorry to be repetitive, but can you remind me if there is a year-over-year limit on what we can carry over or what we can have in the unassigned fund balance? And then my second question is there a difference between the committed, assigned, and restricted fund balances? Is that terminology depicting real, characterizing differences in those those types of fund balances?
It is. Yes, it is. And there is a limit on the unassigned fund balance. That's limited to 3% of the previous year's general fund budget. And so we're over that amount. I can show you the calculation on that to have
No. I understand. I understand that, but I'm just wondering if year to year, it's
the year over year is wherever you are in this particular year in relation to the last fiscal
year. The previous year.
Yes.
This cumulative total is not from last year and this year, but it's like all of the cumulative totals from previous years.
Okay, thank you.
And then did you feel like you got an answer to your committed, assigned, and restricted?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. There are multiple definitions as to which each are. And I would need to go back because I'm not sure that we've got the money in the right buckets, but basically, like, the unassigned is not for a specific purpose, but this is all for school department use. The assigned is usually limited or usually used for your budgeted use of surplus, that if you don't use it, it assigns that portion, like the $500,000 for the general fund. It's assigned for that purpose of using. It can be different uses, but in this case, ours is for the budgeted use if we need that money in for our budget. This is how we're balancing our budget. But if we don't come close to that, where we're having like a surplus this year, we won't touch that. The restricted is specific to like our CTE, and that is definitely something that we can't spend for anything but that purpose for technology. And committed. There are multiple. I think there are 5 or 6 categories actually of fund balance. I'm not quite sure how we're using them here, but there are differentiations between them, and some are guided by different accounting principles or by the state. And we'll make sure we have them in the right buckets.
Okay. And did you say, Javier, that this was similar to last year? Did we go over fund balance last year as well?
I think the 376,000 that you see there in that balance adjustment is how much we were over last year at the end of the year in relation to the previous year. Is my understanding of that correct, Kathy?
We're looking at the FY20 budget, and yes,
Okay.
I'm looking at, yeah. We'll have another calculation at the end at the end of FY21, but right now that's specific to FY20.
So 376,000 is how much we were over the 3% at the end of FY.
Looking at the FY compared to the FY20 budget, yes. Yeah. And we'll do we do calculation every year. We'll look at the FY21 budget and look at how much goes into our fund balance, what that ending fund balance is, and compare that to 3% of the prior year's budget. And the difference is the excess. And I can show you the calculation. It's easier if I actually have a spreadsheet on a different location too. I think we'll need to spend some more time with this.
And we can do that in a memo or something like that if that would be helpful. But I think for today's purposes, it was, that's just sort of accounting that we've never actually, made that move before. So, that's why that's here today.
Okay. Any other questions on this slide? Not seeing any.
Okay. Are we ready to move on then to the next section on the agenda?
I am.
Okay. Do you want to advance slides, Kathy? So we have significant detail behind these, but I think what we wanted to do today is primarily lay out a framework of how we're thinking about this. My superstitious nature makes me really nervous to be doing this without having the money, already in the bank. So I do this, sort of understanding that. We thought it was going to be done last week, and it isn't. And I'm feeling a sense of urgency, particularly if there's if any of this is going to be moved in the direction of reducing taxes, that we would need to act on this quickly in order to be able to do that. And so I think that's why I wanted to proceed with this meeting and to talk through this framework. So the way that we lay this out is, there's sort of different options, but I think it's important to understand that these options are not necessarily mutually exclusive of each other, that some of these could be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, or, all of that, and then there's still money left over to do a little bit of other things. So, I hope this will be clear as I walk through these, but I just wanted to sort of make sure that you understand what we're trying to do. So, and also that these are not the only things that we can do with the money, just to remind you we have in the budget orders that were approved by the council authorization to take the money. So that's not in question. And then we need the board to determine, and then the city council to also ratify how we're going to use that money. So I think that, if there is no action or agreement, it goes into fund balance. And obviously, as you saw just now, we are already over our fund balance. And so we would be very significantly above fund balance and would need to then create a reserve, which is one of the options that we are presenting here, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be that reserve. So, the first option obviously would be to put all $6.2 million of that into reducing property taxes. So, the way that we laid this out is what is the action that you would be taking, and then, what the impact would be in the relevant place. And so, in this particular case, if we were to put all of it towards the taxes, it would decrease the tax rate by 77 cents. So a very significant reduction of the tax rate. And when we go on to the next slide, we will get into a little bit more of the details around that. The second one would be to first use $1.3 million to pay for the custodians that are currently on federal funding, but that at some point in the future we will need to move back to the district's budget. And so part of it would be to use that, and then the remainder would be, could be used to reduce property taxes, but not necessarily. It could be used for other purposes as well, some of the other things that we're going to talk about. What that also does in terms of the impact, in addition to decreasing, if we were to put all of it towards the tax rate, it would decrease the tax rate by 61 cents, but it would also free up $1.3 million in federal funds that are currently devoted to that expense that could then be used for other purposes. So that's another option. The other one is to just do the custodians, right? So is that what we have here?
This is what
This is a little bit different from what I did. Can you help me with that?
Sure, of course. This one was just showing what if we just added, just for purposes of discussion, if we added the 1.3 million back to the general fund budget, what would that look like? Assuming, like going forward, if we were to do this in FY23, assuming that everything else was the same and we had no additional federal funding, what would the tax impact be of adding just 1.3 million back to the local budget?
Yeah. So
just to clarify, there wouldn't be a tax impact for for FY22.
Correct. There is no tax impact for this year, but the tax impact, the expected tax impact of that going forward would be that 16 cents increase.
Can we just clarify that when we present this as we go forward to the board or what have you?
Yeah, I thought that we had a bullet in there that said that there would be no impact on the tax rate for FY22, but that bullet needs to be added there. So. And then the other one that we want to spend a little bit of time on is to use the totality of that funding, or any subsection of that, to put into a debt service reserve that we could then access over the coming years, depending on how much money is in there, to offset the increases that we project are coming as a result of the BFOF projects rolling on. So if you recall, and we'll go back and show this in a little bit. If you recall, during the budget process, we showed how that there are fairly significant increases for the next 4 or 5 years until the what is currently the pension bond ends in FY27, and at which point then our projection is to revert back to where we were last year. So somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 million in debt service. And the last one would be to just take, and we added this at the last minute, to just show what it would take to allow us to reduce the tax rate increase to zero, combined for the city and the school district. And so that would be to use $1.5 million to actually just use that portion to reduce taxes, which would then allow us to have 2 years in a row as a city where there is no tax rate increase. So those are the broad parameters of the options, and we're prepared to go into detail on each of them. And I think it might make sense for you to, if you have any clarifying questions or want to talk about these, and then we get into the detail of them as we dive into those, as opposed to going through and doing all the really detailed look at it. You have it in the packet and can also look at it. But, I think just maybe a broader conceptual conversation would be the right place to start, if that's okay with you.
I think that's a good idea. I see hands up already, so maybe I'll start with Roberto and then Emily.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, if either in the rest of the presentation or in the memo that comes up, if we could, on top of the dollar amount that the tax rate will be impacted, also have the percentage, just because we traditionally refer to the percentage, and it's a good reference point for us to compare, particularly when we're looking back at what we passed.
And that's on the detail.
It's on
we haven't shown. Yeah.
So, yeah.
My question is, I think these are good options for us to consider. The other thing that we've talked a little bit about that I am still interested in pursuing is around pre-K. And, we're falling short on where we had hoped to be on pre-K when we overhauled the program a couple of years ago because of so many different barriers. But, my interest is in a couple of ways. Like right now, we can't provide before and after care because of all of the licensing requirements. So one idea was to use this funding to help hire a team of people to help get us through those licensing requirements, and then provide before and after care. Another was to bring back, go back to the fact that when Ocean Ave School was renovated, it was renovated in such a way that it was construction ready to build, I believe, at least 2 new pre-K classrooms. So given our continued challenges with pre-K, our need to continue to expand, both in providing the services we need in order to enable families to use it, and then to expand to include more kids, is there a way to use this funding to where we usually don't have this latitude? Is there any opportunity to use this funding for part of the funding to expand pre-K?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there is an opportunity to use the funding that way. I have not looked at the specifics. This is the first time I've heard Ocean Avenue's addition being discussed as pre-K. I know that there was a plan that there is a plan in place to build out a wing, if you will, to the second story. So I don't think that was intended to be pre-K just by virtue of the fact that it is a second story. But so that's the first time that I've heard that. And then in terms of the before and after care, we're committed to doing and being ready for before and after care for the 22-23 school year. And, with the resources, we could certainly, and I talked about that with staff, and they could use additional resources to expedite that process. But with the additional resources or without the additional resources, we are on track to do that for the 23-24. 22-23 school year. So that is our plan. And there's no way that we would, even if we hired, all the King's horses and all the King's men, to be able to get the licensing in place for the beginning of the school year.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a couple of questions just on this slide. So in the impact column, when you describe the decrease in the tax rate, is that specifically the school side, or is that the overall?
It is specific to the school. I noticed, I was thinking we should have put that in there. I should have added that school tax rate.
Curious about which. And then, so some of the, we're looking at a total amount of 6.2 million, and some of these don't add. So projection 5, for instance, is 1.5 million towards the tax impact. So that would leave us some left over, right? Okay. So some of these add up and some of them don't. So, and then my other question was, so the fund balance that we just talked about, can that be used to go directly to the tax rate? The excess?
That we could have done that if we had used unassigned fund balance when we projected the budget at the beginning of the budget process. I don't remember, Kathy, do you remember off the top of your head how much I know we have traditionally put about $500,000 from unassigned.
Yep, 500,000
into the budget. So
which
if we had
we did.
Put in $5.5 million,
right.
Which we obviously did.
At that point, it's a projected, and then by this point, it becomes actual, and we can no longer use it for this year anyway. Correct?
Right. Correct.
Okay. I guess, so one thing I'm thinking about, assuming that this funding comes through, the legislature has now funded 55%. They've met that obligation. So then subsequent years, it's not going to be, it's not like we're going to, as if they continue to fund education at 55%, we're not going to see increases really anymore. Correct? This is like a one time.
No, we think this would level up. If this continued, there's, the district would receive more money than what we have traditionally received. We wouldn't see another jump of 6.2 million, but we would see, a higher number than what we would have seen without that. And I did just, and this is where I'm going to mess it up and it's not going to make sense. But, remember that we do project that we're going to lose state funding, EPS, because of the valuation in the city, right? So there's, and we've been projecting that we would, continue to lose. So with a higher level of funding at the state level, that is the funding that the governor's supplemental budget proposes, we would still see decreases, but they would be decreases on a bigger slice.
Right. But I think that's kind of my point is, so if this becomes our operating budget, then we're still going to see a decrease next year because of valuation, unless the legislature decides to fund education to more than 55%.
Yeah.
Right. And until we become a minimum receiver, which will probably be pretty soon, in a few years, right?
I mean, it would be a longer trajectory given this additional level of funding, right? So, this is ballpark. These are not the actual numbers, but I think this year's EPS was somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 million. It would move to 24 million. We were projecting to lose, I don't remember, like anything from 1.5 to 3 million. So down to, 15 or, 16 and a half. And, now we would be losing, roughly that much on a higher base of, closer to 24 million. And that's, again, assuming that the formula doesn't change, assuming that, our enrollment stays, flat and things along those lines. But, I think you can assume that our base would be bigger if this level of funding continued. And so our reductions would be similar to what we projected them to be. Mm-hmm. But it would take longer to get to minimum receiver because we're starting from a higher base.
Okay. Interesting. Any other thoughts on this currently? Do we want to move? Roberto and then Emily.
Just a quick question following up on that. So if adding the 6.2 million, what percent, if we get the 6.2 million, what percentage then did the EPS end up covering our budget? Did you say 24%?
No, I mean, our budget's at 120, right? And, 24%.
So we were at 18 before the 6.2?
Yeah, it was 18 million. Yeah, but I think that's right, because our general fund budget this year was 99 million, I think. And so that's about right. It was about 18%.
Emily?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about this. And for me, I think it is our responsibility as a school board to use this money to stabilize our financial situation. We know we're in an ever more challenging financial place because the valuation is increasing so much, and we will lose state money each year. Although this is certainly, the commitment to 55% is huge and so meaningful. So I think that it behooves us, especially after we had such an overwhelming vote on by the voters at the polls a couple of weeks ago, with 77% of voters supporting our budget. I think it behooves us to use this to stabilize our financial situation for the future. And so for me, what that means is that we move the custodians onto the general fund. So we don't have that hanging out there, and can bring those continuing full-time positions into our core budget. And then that we create a debt service reserve to help us over the next 4 years as we're facing increased debt service before the pension obligation bonds roll off. I think that those two steps, and if there's an opportunity for pre-K, that would be the third piece I'd want to see. But otherwise, absent the opportunity on pre-K, I would want to do those two pieces because it puts us in a better financial place down the road than we otherwise would be in. It deals with the debt service in a meaningful way. It doesn't leave this potential, gap in our budget with the custodians paying for custodians, ongoing positions with federal money that is going to disappear. So I think, again, that it really behooves us as board members to be stewards of our financial situation moving forward, and to that the most responsible step is to take those two steps to help offset the continued ever more challenging situation we'll be in as our valuation increases.
Roberto?
Thank you. I just wanted, I was hoping that we can go into the details of the options before we start really going into preferences. I was awaiting that. Can we move on then to the next piece?
Yeah. Kathy, do you want to go ahead then and guide us through these?
Okay. So this first one relates to adding the full amount to offset property taxes of the 6.2 million. So down here, the 6.2 million would be added to our non-tax revenue, and the difference would be offsetting the amount that we'd raise for property taxes. That's the 77 cents decrease that we were talking about in the rate. This is for each scenario. This is what was the approved budget in this column here. And then this would be the difference. And so this is showing it would be a 1% decrease, in our tax rate. And then down here, this is what we projected the city's share to look like. This would be the 2273 would be what the total city and school rate would be. And then kind of applied that 2273 to our little house example that we used for a $250,000 home, and said this is what the tax bill would look like versus last year. So if we applied the whole 6.2 million against our property taxes to reduce that amount, that's the impact here would be $145.31 on a quote unquote typical taxpayer's bill. So that's the first one.
Let's pause and see if there are any questions.
So right now we've got a $12.33 tax rate for the school department as the approved budget. And this would bring us down to $11.57 for the school tax rate.
Any questions on this projection?
I'm not seeing any.
Turn it on, Kath.
Okay. The second one is adding the 1.3 million in custodial salary and benefits back to the local budget. And we were actually anticipating using the federal funding, as we mentioned, for these costs while it was available. But it also assumes that so that's adding it back, the 1.3 up here, to our baseline where we had removed it. And it would be applying the 6.2 would be, again, the non-tax revenue, and the difference between the 6.2 and the 1.3 would be the amount that we would be reducing our property tax levy by, 4.9 million. And that would take us from a $12.33 tax rate for the school department to an $11.73 tax rate, which would be the decrease of 61 cents. And then this shows what the impact would be for the combined tax bill for the city and school, assuming that the city is reducing its taxes by the 4% that they're projected to receive.
Any questions on that slide? Not seeing any.
So in this one, just to be clear, what we're doing is using the 1.3 million for custodians, and then using the remainder, the delta between that and the 6.2 to reduce property taxes.
I do see Roberto has his hand up.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to pause and humbly say that I'm having a hard time following along. When we're talking about the changes, we're talking about the changes from the approved FY22, and my mind keeps going to compared to FY21. So when we're saying, did I explain that correctly? Okay, I'm just again acknowledging that I'm having a hard time.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll explain it that way then.
Yeah, and I don't want to change the way you're explaining it just to me, but just wanted us to kind of say that, because we've all along, when we're talking about a budget development process, we're always comparing to a previous year, but here we're literally just comparing to what we did a couple of weeks ago. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I needed an extra minute.
And this does compare it to last year. That's this column. So it would be a 4-cent increase over last year, or a 33.33% increase last year.
And the 61 cents is the difference between what we approved and what we
and what.
Yes, that's what that was the part that I meant that I was having trouble with, but I'm with it now.
Okay. Because this is where we landed with the approved budget at the 1233. Okay, and then should I advance to the third option? The third one?
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, the third one is just showing this is what it would look like if we were to just add 1.3 million back to the budget. And understanding it's using FY22 as the example, assuming no change, but let's pretend this is FY23. There's no changes from FY22, and we want to add back 1.3 million of custodial salaries. What would that do to the tax rate? So right now we have an approved tax rate of $12.33. It would bring it up 16 cents if we were to add 1.3 back to a budget, assuming everything's the same from 22 to 23, which it won't be.
Yeah, so this one is particularly challenging to make sure that I just want to make sure that it sinks in. Even though we're showing it on FY22, what we're doing is we're just extrapolating what the impact would be if nothing else changed, and we just move this budget year to next budget year. The impact of adding the custodians back is 16 cents on the tax rate. Now, of course, everything's going to change for next year, but you'll know that 0.16, so 16 cents, will be the result of adding those. Now as I'm looking at it, understand the complexity, because we're talking about FY22, but we're talking about FY23, but we're showing you on FY22. So just to make it even more confusing, the impact of just doing the custodians this year is a net zero, right? Because we're bringing the revenue in to be able to cover that cost. So this is projecting out what the impact would be next year. I've confused myself. I can't imagine.
No. That was, yeah, maybe I just shouldn't have even included this one in there, but I think the question was, okay, what's it going to be if we don't add back custodial 1.3 this year? What's it going to look like next year? And of course, next year, I don't really know, because everything is probably going to change. But if everything stayed the same and we added 1.3 million back, this is what it would look like. So maybe we should proceed to the next one.
Quickly.
Okay. So this is what we projected, and this is just a projection. This is like worst case scenario projection, that these 3 additional BFOF projects are going to be bonded. We're going to go out for bonds on these 3, and that would all occur in the same year at the same time. It may or may not, but if it did, and we still had the pension bond over here, it's increasing our debt service by, 1.6 million in FY22 if we go out to bond this year, or this coming year, 3.8 million for the following year, and then it goes up like 3 million. And this is just showing if we use the 6.2 million to offset the first year increase, the second year increase, we'd have a little bit left to do part of the third year increase. That's what this would look like. And so was trying to project what using 1.6 of a reserve would look like on the tax rate if we were to just in FY 2022, if we were to use that 1.6, if we actually issued these bonds. What that would look like, that would be, we'd be decreasing 20 cents from current approved.
Emily?
Sorry, I understand now. Lower my hand.
I mean, we can once if it were to be reserved, we could use it in any fashion once it's reserved. 6.2, you could do it evenly. This is just another scenario if you wanted to apply 1.2 million over the 4 years until the pension bond payments drop off. You could do that too. But that's if both of these scenarios are if we reserve the full 6.2 million for debt service. And then I just brought this forward for FY22, saying if we applied 1.6, we could reduce the tax rate this year potentially by 20 cents.
Emily?
So just on, if you go back a slide on those, I'm wondering the thinking around scenario A. Scenario B makes more sense to me, especially when we have federal COVID funding.
We can't.
For the
we can't use any of the COVID funding for debt service.
I fully recognize that, but it does give us some additional resources that we otherwise won't have. So I'm not sure I would front load the, I don't know if do we need to allocate it by year?
No, I think once it's reserved, no, you can use it.
Okay.
We recommend, each year how much we'd like to use.
This was really just to illustrate that there's multiple ways in which you could use that, for that very purpose, to just, sort of represent the fact that there's no predetermined, this is the way that it's going to be spent in each of those years, just that you will have over the next, if it's a 3-year or a 5-year, whatever it is, that you would be able to use it all in 1 year, or, half and half for 2 years, whatever option makes the most sense. It buys a significant flexibility to be able to, to be able to offset whatever those increases might be.
And then lastly, we wanted to just look at to see what the projection would show, how much of the 6.2 we would need to just maintain the same tax rate, combined city and school, as last year. So this one's to maintain compared to last year. So last year, the combined tax rate was 2331. We're expecting the city to move their tax rate from 1162 to 1116. But that's a 4% that they've discussed reducing their tax rate by. And what would our tax rate need to be so that we could maintain the same combined tax rate? And ours would need to be $12.15, which is an 18-cent decrease to maintain the same combined tax rate.
Emily?
Yeah, just going back to the previous slide, thinking about some of the criticism or the criticism we've gotten from city councilors on our budget. It's really, it's in two buckets. It's around our increasing debt service, and we've heard that a lot from the mayor and from other councilors about their concerns about our increasing debt service before the pension obligation bonds roll off. And it's around the using federal funds to pay for the custodians, to pay for 20 custodian positions over the next 2 years. So just wanted to highlight that we have an opportunity to address the city council concerns that city councilors have raised about our budget through this process with this additional state funding.
Is that, did we get through the last slide or? Okay.
That was the last slide. Yep. With just what would it be to remain flat, the tax rate.
Anybody need to go back to any of those, or maybe we could go back to the summary one just to kind of take a look at the high level again? So my thoughts, I agree with Emily about getting the district on sound financial footing. And I think that much of what is in this proposal seeks to do just that. I do like the idea of offsetting BFOF debt service and moving the custodians back into our general fund. I do think we should think about the 1.5 million to allow for a zero combined increase, zero increase this year. Just given our conversations with the council and the fact that we're going through reevaluation, I feel like that it would be kind of I think it would respect some of the concerns that were raised during that process, recognizing, of course, that we did end up having a budget that we're having a slight increase that was passed already in lieu of that. But I think that, 1.5 out of 6.2 would still leave us a good amount of money to be able to address a lot of the other stuff too. Roberto?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm probably not going to say something very different, but I might frame it just under a different point of view or a different perspective. If I were to rank the top three things I'd like us to achieve, I think they're aligned with what Chair Victor and Chair Trevorrow just said. I don't think Anna referred to the to the custodians, but I'd like the custodians to be brought back into the general fund so that we don't have to worry about that down the line. I like however much, that's a $1.3 million increase. And I'd like then also to address the overall tax increase with the 1.5. And I think from there, the debt service relief idea, then I would rank it as my third priority. But again, I think all of these options are centering us with respecting or acknowledging the concerns that were raised during the council discussions. So again, those are the three things that I would prioritize from the options.
I'm wondering if Board Member Russell Better, if you have any thoughts that you would want to share, because I think next we want to talk about, sort of the process going forward. So if you have, ideas on, how you're thinking about it as you look at all of these options or the other options. I know that Chair Figdor also, talked about the pre-kindergarten option, which we agreed could potentially be what, it's not something that we have priced out or weighed, but that the money is not limited to these options that we've laid out. These are the things that we wanted to, raise for consideration. So I don't know if you have thoughts at this point. And it's perfectly okay if you don't and you want to defer.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think I'm just listening to everyone and trying to understand the options. I guess, let's see, the projection 4 with the debt service. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm feeling drawn to that option. But I guess I'm not clear. Okay, so the projection 2 with the 1.3 million going to custodial, that's with the, okay. So the only option that's really looking at the debt service is the projection 4. Is that right?
Yeah, but again, these are illustrative examples, so you could do, multiple, combinations and permutations of these. So, I think that both that one shows the 1.3 million added in and the rest being used for property taxes. The next option 3 is just the custodians, without any property tax relief, and then just instead looking at what the impact is of doing that down the road.
Yeah, I guess I'm just feeling generally more drawn to putting some towards the debt service, but I do feel like the custodial, shifting the custodial expense makes sense too. So maybe I'm feeling like, the maybe potential combination of those two makes sense to me. So I guess that's all I can say for sure that I'm, but just taking it in and appreciate all the information.
So I think, I'm sorry, Anna, sorry.
Could I ask a question? And I'm sorry if I missed this at the very beginning of the meeting, but my understanding is that there's conversation in Washington right now around this infrastructure deal that Republicans and that 20 moderate Republicans and Democrats are coming together around, that they would use some unspent state and local COVID funds to pay for their plan. And I don't know if anyone knows on this call, or if Javier, if you know, if that's some or more than some of what would be in the governor's supplemental budget. So I'm just wondering kind of how, there's been a delay in the legislature on this. Is that wrapped up in what's happening in DC, or how, what's our current understanding of how solid this money actually is?
I don't know if this is where the governor's money is coming from. I don't think so. I think that the money for this is coming from, the increased revenue at the state level and, unexpended from previous years. I don't think that it's the federal funding. The only federal funding that is actually lapsing is what went into the CRF. So, to whatever extent we don't spend all of our CRF money, that reverts back into the Treasury. But all of the other packages that we have all have, at least another year of life for the first CARES Act money, and then 3 years for the other two. So So that would not be going back into the treasury. But the CRF money,
yeah, I'm just concerned, and I don't know if, again, I don't know enough about all these pots of money, but I'm just concerned that there may be discussion in Washington to raid some of the money that was allocated for state and local governments in response to the COVID crisis.
Is that where this money is coming from? Is it, yeah. Is that an I don't know or a no?
I don't know. I don't. No.
I think, and my sense, just in talking with my partner, who's a senator, is everything seems in line for this money to be approved on the 30th. And that if, I think they're recognizing that there may be an issue with the timing for it to be potentially used towards property tax relief for this year, for FY22. And so what they may do is pass some kind of way for us to be able to make that allocation if we choose to, some sort of exception to extend that prospect. Roberto?
Thank you. Just to clarify that, excuse me, for us to be able to use the excess funds for tax relief, that's a statewide, that's a limitation that we have due to statewide legislature, or is that a municipality limitation? Like for us to be able to have that July date that we have as a cutoff for us to be able to have an impact on this year's tax rate, is that just us here municipality, that's our deadline, or is that the entire state has that same deadline of making changes to their budgets?
I don't, there's not a statutory deadline. It's the timing by which the action has to be taken so that it can be put into the tax bills. So I know just from talking to my colleagues in the region that they're all facing a similar, constraint, in some cases earlier, in other cases just slightly later. But it all just seems to come to a head around the end of July to be able to get it to the, to the assessor, and then have it reflected in the bills that actually go out to families and or to homes, to businesses, and so on.
So any other thoughts on this? Javier, do you want to talk about process from here?
Yeah. So I think this is where it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing. Obviously, the big egg is, will we have the money, right? But then, if there is no need to incorporate any of this into the tax rate. So in other words, if you were saying to us, I really want to just prioritize, covering custodians and, then putting the rest into a reserve of some kind, there's less timing pressure than there is if we want to reduce the tax rate in any way. That's our real pressure. So if we find out too late, one, or decide that we don't want to use it to reduce the tax rate for this year, then we really don't have a significant time pressure, because we have, when the board comes back in August, we can, make decisions and bring it to the city council and do time and everything else. So it's only if we want to reduce taxes that we have the, very significant pressure of trying to make this. I did reach out to the city manager over the weekend to find out what the timing would need to be for us to be able to get something in front of the council. They have a meeting scheduled for the 19th, which is a special meeting. And my question was, is there any way that we could get on that agenda, assuming that if by then we could have the board have gone, obviously gotten the money, the board gone through the process, made the decision that we wanted to do that, and then bring something to the city council. I just checked my email. I did not hear back from John, so I'll follow up tomorrow and see what our options are on that front. But that's the sort of the best case scenario as I'm seeing it right now, is that we can get onto, a single agenda to have that change made, and and then make it under the threshold to be able to have it incorporated into taxes this year. So I guess from my perspective, and this is where I'm still just struggling with, if we don't know how much we're getting until it actually gets, approved in the legislature. And I know there's lots of other things that are on the table that, are potentially competing for this. So I don't know that we can count, our check. And so I don't know if it makes sense for us to bring this. We have a board meeting scheduled as an emergency board meeting, which we had originally scheduled for a different purpose, which was to potentially consider the Presumpscot contract, which has now been pushed off for, another week. As you may recall, we talked about this at the board meeting last week. But we have that meeting on the books for the 28th as a potential special meeting. And so does it make sense for us to bring this to the board and have the discussion that we've had today with the board, so that we can then know that we are going to use 1.5 million to reduce taxes, or we're going to use all of it, whatever we get, to reduce taxes, or we're not going to use any of it to reduce taxes, in which case we don't have as much urgency to, we don't have to get on the city council's agenda in June, because they're in July, because there's no pressure to get that into the budget. Does it make sense to do that without knowing what our amounts are, I guess is my question.
Is that the meeting still scheduled for 8 in the morning? Okay, so is that, you have quorum for that meeting? Because I know I can't be there, and I know that at least one or two others can't. Yeah,
I believe we still
have six. There are 6 board members who can attend that meeting.
Okay. I mean, it's tough. I think, 2 of us tonight have said that we would be interested in pursuing the 1.5 towards taxes. It's hard to, I don't know how to really kind of, estimate what the opinions of the rest of the board would be. And I think that, we kind of need to figure that out. If, Emily, what's your thought?
I would just say that if we want to bring something to the board on the 28th or on July 6th, which is the other tentative meeting date that we put aside, I think we need a recommendation out of this committee tonight, right? So I would, suggest that someone makes the motion, and we have 2 of our 3 committee members here.
Okay, so Roberto, are you ready to do that?
I was actually going to say something similar. I said maybe not a concrete recommendation, but I did want something to come out of this committee that does keep in play that meeting, because I would like this committee to make a recommendation based on the options that do have an impact on the tax rate. So you mentioned that 2 people mentioned the 1.5. I think those of us, like Chair Victor and myself, who mentioned the custodians, that also has a tax increase impact.
Not for this year.
Pardon me?
Not for this year.
So how come in the summary it's put in as a tax decrease impact?
Because in that example, what we did is we added the custodians and then we used the rest. So the 4.9 million difference, we reduced the tax rate with that. So yeah, I knew this is the one that I'm struggling the most with, is the go up, Kathy. Go on to the next slides. the next one, yeah, here. So this is the one where projection 2, if you can go back one. And this projection, Roberta, which is I think what you were thinking about, is we use the $6.2 million. 1.3 of that goes towards the custodians, and the remainder, so roughly 4.9, is used to reduce the tax rate. And then the next one is the one where we just do the custodians without doing any tax relief. And this is the really confusing one, because it's really showing you like FY22, but it's really in FY23 that we would see the tax impact on the upward end. So bringing the custodians in would actually raise the tax rate by 16 cents if all else remained.
And that's because essentially it raises our budget by that amount.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
But just to be clear, that if we were going to include some of the debt service fund, we would be offsetting the increase. So let's just make sure we're looking at the full picture.
Yeah.
I would suggest.
Wait,
I'm so sorry.
I just wasn't finished with what I was saying. So when I was looking at the summary, Superintendent, I was actually looking at option 3, which has an increase, which is then why I said we would still have money then to do an offset. So my priority was, as Chair Pickler said, to look at the budget next year and avoid, that then landing on us. So increase it by moving that to the budget, to a general fund. That's a decision that even if it's an increase, because we've been talking about the board having to meet if we have a decrease, I would assume we would also, if there was an increase, so any change to the tax rate. So that's why I said that to keep that. And then I did not particularly think that using the whole 4.9 remaining as tax relief was prudent, but I did want us to have a conversation about some direct impact to the tax rate, which is why I mentioned the 1.5 mil at the bottom. And then the third priority, as I mentioned, was then to figure out what's left that we can apply to debt service. And so the discussion, that's what I would like this committee to propose. And that then should have us, or rather, that should then mean that we have to keep that meeting, because there will be a decision that has an impact on the tax rate. Does that make sense?
Yes. Emily?
So just to restate that, it would be use 1.5 million to offset the tax increase. Use 1.3 million to move the custodians into the general fund, and use the remainder for the debt service fund.
You're always so much better at summarizing the stuff that I confuse people with. Yes, I think that's
just to be clear, that's not what I support, but that's what I hear you and Anna.
But that is what I was. That's the recommendation that I think will be prudent from this committee, because it leaves doors open and it allows the board to have a conversation. But we narrow down, again, that's mine, not the other members that are here, but we narrow down the list of options that way. And that's again just my thoughts, not anything that I'm strongly advocating for, just where I'm at right now.
So, and I actually am exactly in that same place. So I think, if Roberta, if you're comfortable with putting that out as a motion to make that recommendation, I would second that. I guess my only clarifying question about it is, if by increasing the budget, by adding the custodians back on, we are also increasing the tax rate, does that mean that the 1.5 towards the tax rate no longer gets it to 0?
We're increasing the tax rate for FY23, not for FY22. So there'd be, and there's going to be, many other changes to our budget. So it's just indicating that once you move those into the general fund, we have to continue to, we then carry those positions. So it's just looking forward to the future.
Okay, got it. Okay, so then I'll take it that Roberto, you have made that recommendation. I've seconded it.
Just you too. So I'm assuming you're also voting for your motion.
Unless we want to debate this further. Anything else to say about it, or are you ready to vote on it, Roberto?
Just if the superintendent, and I guess he already did, but or Kathy, any immediate feedback on that being the recommendation from the committee?
I mean, no, I think that it's a clear recommendation to me, and I think that it's something for us to bring back to the board to discuss. So, yeah. I mean, you know, I will just reiterate, you know, my concern about all of this is that, you know, we're playing with money that we don't have at this point, and so I think that, you know, that's the one where, you know, so if we decided to move forward with that and then we wound up getting 5.5 million, does that mean that we do the first two and then have less for number three, or does that change the way that you approach it? And that's the part that I'm a little bit nervous about, not knowing what actually comes out of the legislature until it comes out. So.
Great. Yeah, and I think we share the same kind of nervousness or about the uncertainty. I think this recommendation does not mean that other options cannot be weighed in by the board at that time, but rather just where we were at today, given the uncertainty, and that this is just at this point a really hypothetical, I guess we can say, that's the basis of which the committee saw it. And I think if we state that, then whatever the picture looks like at the day of the meeting, it'll be easier then to just carry on to the next step.
I agree with that. Okay, then I will go ahead and call for a vote on the recommendation, which is to put 1.49 million towards the tax rate, 3.2 towards custodians, and
1.3 towards
1.3,
and the remainder towards debt service.
To create a debt service reserve.
Okay, so all those in favor, Roberto?
Hey.
And myself.
Great, thank you. My last question on this is, we have the meeting on the 28th. We have a meeting on the 6th. I think it's more likely that we will know by the 6th whether this is approved or not. I think they're coming back at the end of the month, so I actually don't know that they're going to get it done by the 6th. Would you prefer that we wait and do the meeting on the 6th, or should we deal with the hypothetical on the 28th at our scheduled meeting?
I would prefer to wait, so we're not talking in there's less likelihood that we're talking in hypotheticals. Also, I know on the 28th that we're missing Anna and Sarah and Adam. I do want to just make sure we have on the 6th, because I haven't heard from a lot of people, so I can work on that in the next 24 hours.
Is that a regular Tuesday?
That's a Tuesday, 6 p.m. on July 6th, and of course it would be a shorter meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can the board members on this call make that?
Okay.
I'm here I can make anything. Let me look at the calendar first.
The day after the long weekend, 4th of July.
And Ms. Russell-Better, can you make that day? Yeah.
Okay.
So I hear you saying that we would prefer to wait then until the 6th and try for that.
Yeah, assuming that we can get most of the board.
So I'm sorry, Superintendent, does that mean, but isn't the 28th too early for the Presumpscot one? Does that mean just we'd have to get another meeting and just scrap the?
No, I mean, if the 6th, if we have a working bid from Presumpscot,
we'll do that too.
Two items on the agenda. One would be this, and
gotcha.
then Presumpscot.
Thanks.
So better in that we'd only have to do one summer meeting.
Yeah. Great. I think it's settled.
All right. Any last thoughts? Are we ready to adjourn? So I'd call for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Seconded by myself. All those in favor?
Fine.
And we're adjourned at 7:27.